Father, I see that you are drawing a line in the sand. We want to be standing on your side, holding your hand. So let your kingdom come, let it live in me. This is my prayer, this is my plea. Father, I see that you are drawing a line in the sand, and I want to be standing on your side.
Well, tonight we are going to talk about the Feast of the Lord. We're going to talk about all the festivals and the holy days that are found in the Bible. We're going to talk about God's whole calendar and what it means versus our calendar. And we'll discuss, by the end here, we will have gone through all of the feasts, all 7 of the feasts, and basically do an overview. So this is not an in-depth study on the feast. For some of you, you will already know all of the information here. You may pick up a couple tidbits. For others, this will be brand new. So no matter where you're at on the spectrum here, we want to create a situation where everyone is edified and kind of growing at the same time. So we're going to do just an overview of the feast. And then as time allows and as the Lord allows, we're going to go into detail of each feast at a different date on all the levels. Because how many know that as you get into the Scriptures, it can just infinitely go deep. There's so many different things that we can learn about each individual thing. So the Feast of the Lord, prophetic rehearsals of the second coming. Okay, and that's really what this is. It's all the rehearsals of the first coming and the second coming of the Messiah. So here's some questions that we want to ask. Number 1, why should we study the feast anyway? Number 2, aren't they Jewish and given only to the Jews? And number 3, what significance do they play in my life for today and in the future? Okay, so we want to find out what these are all about because, I mean, what do we even need to know about these for anyway? I mean, if we're going along and we have a relationship with the Lord and you're saved and you know that the Messiah is coming back and you believe in Jesus, what do we need to be doing why do we even need to know these things? Okay, we're going to answer all these questions as we move through here, and hopefully you'll have a little bit more of an idea, a little significance about some of the things that we're going to be talking about. These are the 7 holy days, the 7 feasts of the Lord. The ones that are in green are the spring feasts, okay? And the ones in the orangish red, are the fall feast. And then you have number 4, Shavuot, that's stuck in the middle. So let's just go through these real quickly. The first one is Passover. The second one is unleavened bread. Most of you are very familiar with these first 3. And the third one is first fruits. And then the fourth one, or the spring feast, really culminate into the summer feast of Shavuot. In Hebrew and in Greek, it's called Pentecost. And most of us are very familiar with that. The last 3 are the most significant of the feasts, which we'll be spending a little bit significant amount of time near the end here, because they all deal with the second coming of the Messiah. And everyone wants to know when the second coming of the Messiah is going to be. Okay, I haven't met anybody yet that doesn't want to know when the Messiah is coming back. But I can assure you that just like in my own family, that whatever my wife has on her calendar, that is the real calendar. Okay, I have my calendar, but she has her calendar, and her calendar is the calendar. Okay, so I think Yahweh kind of works that same way in the fact that He allows us to have our own calendar. And He's okay with us having our own calendar. But understand that His calendar trumps our calendar. Would you agree with me? Okay? So no matter what His calendar is, I think it's very important that we start off understanding that His calendar is the only one that counts. Okay? All right. So that's important for us to go through. So the fall feast, or Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, and Sukkot. Okay? Or Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Ingathering. Okay? The end of the year, Thanksgiving, so to speak. Okay? All right, so let's go through and work through this, one question at a time. First of all, aren't these just for the Jews? How many have heard that the feast days of the Lord, these are Jewish feasts? Why would you want to celebrate a Jewish feast, David? Why would you want to celebrate, a Jewish holiday? Now, what's strange about that statement is it's completely without fact. So the 2 things that we want to live by, and again, this isn't one of our fundamental rules here, if you will, is that we want to live by the Spirit, absolutely, but we also want to live by what? The truth, okay? So facts are very important. Facts is what is incredibly important as close as the Messiah is getting to coming back. He's starting to bring back His facts and His truth, okay? So we want to not only serve the Lord through Spirit and spiritual things and being led by the Spirit, but the Spirit is only going to lead you into one thing ultimately, and that's going to be the truth for those that are seeking Him, okay? So we want to answer this question, are they given to just the Jews? So let me ask, when were the commandments given? Okay? They were given when? On Mount Sinai. Okay? Now who were they given to? They were given to the Israelites. Okay? They were not given to the Jews. The commandments were given to God's people. They were given to all 12 tribes at the time that were called Israel. As a matter of fact, it was even beyond the 12 tribes that they were given to. They were given to all the people that came out of Egypt that chose to sojourn and to be part of the congregation of Israel. Whether you were a native born or whether you were of an Egyptian background or whether you were of a Turkish background, it didn't matter. If you were an alien, a sojourner, or a native born, and you decided to be part of the children of God, then you were the ones that He was talking to on Mount Sinai. Very critical to understand, because the misconception is that we go back to the fact that because Jesus was actually in the New Testament and He was a Jew and all of His people were Jewish, and they were the ones that were keeping the feast days, that it must be a Jewish holiday. Matter of fact, it's the same way today. The only people, by and large, that keep the commandments or the holy days of the Bible are who? The Jews. Now, let me submit something to you. If the Arabs were the only people that were celebrating the feast days of the Bible, what would we call them? Arab holy days, right? Why are you keeping Arab days? You know, or it doesn't really flow off the tongue like Jewish does, but in any case, we'd be calling whatever the tribe or the culture of the tongue that would be keeping them. But because the Jews are by and large the ones that keep them, we call them Jewish. That's not accurate, archaeology-wise, scientifically, or biblically, okay? So, or intellectually. So we're going to dig a little deeper and find out who exactly they were giving to and why. Leviticus 23:2 says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the feast of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts." Who's talking? God is talking, okay? So Yahweh is speaking and He says, these are my feasts. Matter of fact, when you see the term Lord there in all caps in your King James Bible or whatever Bible you got, that is a hint, because that is actually the four-letter Hebrew letter tetragrammaton Yod He Vav He in Hebrew. The Yud He Vav He. It is actually the proper name of God when you see that. So actually what it says is the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. These are my feasts. Now, why would a dad say that to his kids? Does anybody have teenagers that turn 16? And they get their license and kind of, somehow they take ownership of the car real fast, right? I remember those days. And that's because it's inbred in us to do those things, to take ownership of things that aren't ours and then change them. Because we're very ingenuitive. Okay? We like changing and making better because God forbid that He actually made them right and perfect the first time. Right? So that's what happens. And He knew, see, God's smarter than we are. So He knew that we were going to do this. So right up front, He makes it very clear, children, I want you to know, these are my feasts. And by the way, don't you ever find it interesting that He doesn't call us adults? We're the children of God. Okay? He's the parent. We do what He says. See, all from day one, He creates a parental relationship so that we understand who's in charge. You want to live in my house, you play by my rules, right? Okay. Nowhere in the entire Old Testament does Yahweh refer to His feast as being Jewish. Nowhere. Okay? It doesn't happen. All right, so nowhere in the entire Old Testament does Yahweh refer to His feast as being Jewish. Matter of fact, that would be incredibly wrong for Him to do so, because how many tribes of Israel are there?
12.
There are 12. Okay? So if He says these are Jewish feasts, then what are the other 11 tribes going to do? They don't have to do anything. So therefore, they're not responsible to keep any of the commandments of God because they're Jewish feasts, which means that's the tribe of Judah. So the Danites go, oh, that's a pretty good idea. We can do whatever we want. Those are Jewish feasts. Can you imagine going back 3,000 years at Mount Sinai and the Levites going, I told you Jews, you should have kept the law. He didn't give them to us, He gave them to you. Just ask the Christians 3,000 years from now. They'll tell you. No, He gave them to all the children of Israel. 2 Chronicles 2:4 says this, Behold, I am building a temple for the name of Yahweh my God, to dedicate it to Him, to burn before Him sweet incense for the continual showbread, for the burnt offering mornings and evening, on the Sabbaths, on the new moons, and on the set feasts of the Lord our God. This is an ordinance forever to Israel. Okay? How long did He say? Okay? And just like Bill Clinton says, it's just the definition, depends on what the definition of is, right? So it depends on the definition that you have for forever. Okay? So we need to be very clear and find out what does forever mean in the Scriptures, because right here is the crux of everything that we're going to be talking about before we actually get into the details of the feast, is who they were given to and for how long. And right now we see that there, no question about it, they're given to Israel. Did everybody see that? Okay, Mount Sinai, pretty obvious. And it says right here in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 4, and it was given to Israel forever. So let's find out how forever is, if forever actually penetrates the new covenant shield. Because how many of us have grown up believing that the feast days, the festivals, the laws, the commandments, decrees, the ordinances, the instructions, the manual, the blueprint for living ended when the Messiah came? Okay, most all of us have grown up learning that. So if that's the case, then these shadows that we have been learning about have ended, and they have no value or relevance to us today. And forever, then, the definition of forever ends at the Messiah. Do you understand the logic? Okay? So we're going to find out what forever means. And we're going to find that by going to Zechariah chapter 14. Okay, so if you have your Bibles, you can turn there if you'd like, or you can read it on the slide. But the bottom line is here, the context is the Messiah has just touched down on the Mount of Olives. Does anybody know when this happens? The second coming. Okay? He comes down from riding on the clouds, and his feet land on the Mount of Olives and split it in two. He has just finished destroying the nations, and he's setting up shop in the New Jerusalem. And this is what he says in verse 16. He says, Then the survivors from all the nations that have attacked Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, Yahweh Almighty, to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. I just pulled one verse out of there. So this is intriguing, because we have the nations celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles in the 1,000-year millennial reign of the Messiah. Does everybody see that? So now we have penetrated the veil of the new covenant. Matter of fact, we penetrated beyond the veil of when the Messiah came the first time, all the way through the next 2,000 years, and we penetrated the veil of the second coming of the Messiah, you see. So the question is everything that we've taught about the shadows being just only a part-time job, so to speak, and then they're done away with when the substance comes? If the shadows are truly done away with, then why does He bring them back in the millennium, and not only bring them back, but create punishment, severe punishment, if you don't keep them? I'm going to submit that when He said they're forever, He meant that. There's very few things, let me rephrase, there's nothing that God says that isn't true. Did I say that right? I had to think through that for a second. There's nothing that He says that's not going to come true. So when He says forever, it's probably forever. Would you agree with me? So in biblical hermeneutics and interpretations, you should always err on the side of the literal. And I'm being serious. You should always err on the side of literal if it's ambiguous, because the plain meaning of the text is pretty much the plain meaning of the text. Okay? Verse 17, If any of the peoples of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, they will have no rain. Okay? So I think it's really important that we begin to start learning how to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, whether it's mandatory or not, we can debate that. I happen to believe that it is for us today because it's part of the covenant. But even if it's not, I think it's a good idea to learn them just so that when you get there, you'll already know how to do it. So that rain will come. Because remember, Israel's job was to be a light to the nations. They were supposed to take these wonderful things that God gave them and be a light and spread them to the nations so that the nations could come to know the Lord and they would be blessed as well. Because back in the day, in the ancient day, okay, in the Neanderthal day of the early ancient Jew, as Brad Scott says, is that the commandments were life. They were never looked at as something burdensome. It was only until man added a bunch of stuff to it that they became burdensome. Okay? They were looked at as life throughout the entire kingdom at that time. So let's define who Israel is, because first of all, what we've done is we've defined that the feast days were given to Israel, and we've also uncovered that they were given to Israel forever. So before we even get into the feast days, I think it's very important that we back up and find out, well, what's even the value or the point of why we do this? So we're going to let the Scriptures tell us that. They're given to Israel, they're given forever. So now let's quickly find out who Israel is. Numbers 15:15 says, "One ordinance shall be for you of the assembly," and the Hebrew there is kahal, "and for the stranger who dwells with you, an ordinance forever throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord." Now what we have right here is we have an inclusive definition. A further definition of Israel is not just the 12 tribes, and we've gone over this in great detail before, but I just want to do this in this setting here in a shorter fashion, that it says that one ordinance or one law shall be for you the assembly, the kahal, and for the stranger who dwells among you. Those are not of the native born. So you have an ordinance forever throughout your generations. As you are, so shall the strangers be before the Lord. Now what does that mean? As you are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. There is no difference. Now does that not fit the character that we already know of God? That when He sees us, He does not see, as Paul says, male or female, Greek or Jew, slave, master, on and on. Okay? He sees people, all level, at the cross. And that's what happened, is when He said that when my people come before me, they're my people. I don't care if they're red, yellow, black, blue, or white. Okay? Or what genealogy they come from. If they want to be my people, they will simply be circumcised and keep my commandments, and they will be as if they were native born. Okay? And their name shall be Israel. So could we say that the strangers or the Gentiles were grafted in? Can we use that terminology so early in the Scriptures in number 15? I know it shows up in Romans 11, but right here, would you not agree with me? This is the grafting in of the Gentiles or the nations into Israel. One other thing I want to point out, there's a reason why I pulled out the Hebrew word kahal here. Okay? Does anybody know what that word is in English? I know it says assembly. Okay? But in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, okay, it is translated as church. In the New Testament, the Greek counterpart to the Hebrew kahal is ecclesia, which means church. Actually, that's what it's translated as, is church, but what it means is assembly. Okay, so if I was going to be fair to the translation, this is what this should say. If Numbers chapter 15:15 was in the New Testament, this is what it would say. One ordinance shall be of the church, for the church, and of the church, and for the stranger who dwells with you. One ordinance shall be for you, the church. Okay? We're messing with some theology here, because what we're saying is what the Scriptures is saying, and what Yahweh is saying is that His people are called the church. You see? And what we mostly have grown up with is the church didn't start until the day of Pentecost. Not so. So, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Jeremiah chapter 11. The Lord called your name green olive tree, talking about Israel, lovely and good fruit, with the noise of a great tumult. He has kindled fire on it, and its branches are broken. And we find out later He broke it into two. Okay? So the olive tree we know is Israel, and Israel is the church. Incredibly important to understand as we move into the New Testament that we recognize these terms that are defined in the Old Testament. Because how many remember and understand that in the New Testament times there was no New Testament, so the only scriptures that they had, when 2 Timothy says that all Scripture is inspired by God and worthy for doctrine and reproof and living the way of righteousness, he's not talking about the New Testament. It didn't exist. He certainly wouldn't be talking about himself or his own writings. He's talking about the Old Testament. That's what the scriptures that they had. Okay? So we got to define the New Testament by the Old. So it's very important. I'm bringing this up for a reason. The olive tree is Israel, Jeremiah 11, and Jeremiah 29, and Israel is called the Kahal, or the church. So when we move into Romans 11, this is what we see. In verse 17, if some of the branches were broken off, and you being a wild olive tree, talking to the Gentiles, were grafted in among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. Now the root is the Messiah. We don't have time to go into this. We've gone into it many times before. And the olive tree is Israel. So Ephesians chapter 2, verse 12 tells us very clearly who these people are. And that time you, talking to the Gentiles, were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. Now I'll stop for a moment. Today you are part of the commonwealth of the United States. So far. Okay? Now that may split into several regions here pretty soon, but who knows. But right now we're all under the Commonwealth of the United States. So if you are in the Commonwealth of the United States, are you not under and bound and under the jurisdiction of the Constitution of the United States? Let me say that in biblical terms. If you are in the Commonwealth of the United States, are you not under the covenant of the United States of America? So when Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2 that you who were once without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, the constitution of promise, having no hope and without God in the world, now therefore you are no longer strangers from a different country and foreigners, but you are fellow citizens with the saints. And the word there is set apart ones, by the way. And members of the household of God. So what is Paul saying? He's saying that those who are not native-born Israelites, you are Gentiles, and you are without the covenants of promise. You could not come near to the covenant of promise. Now you have been made near, brought near, and made fellow citizens with the household of God. Now we've always interpreted that as Christianity. They became Christians. But that is not what's happening. It says very clearly there that they are now, they were far off from the covenants of promise of Israel. And they're grafted into the olive tree called Israel, and they're made fellow citizens under the commonwealth of Israel. Does everybody see that? We're not making that up. We're not even stretching it, because it says being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. Now they're brought near and made fellow citizens of the commonwealth of Israel, and by default, you now partake in the promises. You see, we look at it as negative when we say covenants, but covenants, we've got to do something. That's not the way he looked at it, and that's not the way Paul looked at it. The way Paul looked at it was life. Remember, the commandments were called life. They were called truth. They were called the way. That's why when Yeshua said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, they tore their robes, because he was saying, I am the living Torah. Okay? So now we're starting to nail down who this Israel is. So these are his feasts, given to those that are Israel forever. And as we just went through the scriptures, from Deuteronomy to Jeremiah to Romans 11 to Ephesians 2, we just figured out that Israel is anyone who calls upon the name of the Lord and wants to be a child of God. There is no other definition that the Scriptures give of Israel. It is not Israel and the church. Israel is the church. Okay? And the biggest mistake that we've made is, unfortunately, from our interpreters or translators, and sometimes that's a synonymous term, is that they use the word church in place of ecclesia. And it should be assembly every single time. The word church doesn't even show up in the New Testament in the Greek. It is assembly. And is a subtle, very subtle way of turning your mind from assembly. Because if you saw assembly every time, or congregation, and you actually started in the front of the book what would happen is your brain would start instantly correlating assembly congregation to assembly congregation. You see what I'm saying? He calls Israel the assembly congregation. New Testament says it's assembly congregation. We're grafted in, and you go, I get it. But someone changed the word to church, and it got your mind on a different track. So you didn't connect the dots. Okay? So what we want to do is connect the dots back to their original meaning, because the original meaning brings original application. The original application brings connectivity, and connectivity brings power. And that's what we're missing in the church today.